For anyone following the treatment landscape for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, well, the ground beneath us just shifted.
It really did.
After a decade of near stagnation, we have a major market-moving regulatory event to dive into today.
Yeah.
We're talking about the long-anticipated arrival of a novel drug that could really reset the standard of care.
Exactly. This deep dive is focused entirely on the FDA approvals for Boehringer Ingelheim's key compound, nerandomilast, which is going to be marketed as Jascayd.
Jascayd.
Okay, and this isn't just, incremental news. This is potentially a paradigm shift in the anti-fibrotic market.
So our mission today is what? Unpack the science, the trial results.
All of it. We need to dissect the underlying science, scrutinize the critical phase 3 trial results, and really understand the massive implications for the competitive field. Especially, and this is key, when this drug is used in combination with therapies that are already out there.
Okay, so let's start with the headline. The FDA gave its stamp of approval to Jascayd tablets developed by Boehringer Ingelheim not once, but twice late last year.
That's right, twin approvals.
So what exactly were the two approvals they got?
So the first one, and this was the big one, really, that came on October 7th, 2025. And that was for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, IPF.
The one everyone was waiting for.
Absolutely. Then, just a couple of months later, on December 19th, they secured the second approval for a broader indication, progressive pulmonary fibrosis, or PPF, in adults.
That dual win is just huge. And the history here really drives that point home. This is the first entirely new treatment option for IPF approved in the U.S. in, more than a decade?
Over a decade, yeah.
I also thought it was interesting that the new drug application, the NDA 218764, it basically sailed through without an FDA advisory committee.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that suggests the data was so strong, or maybe the safety was so clear, that the agency just didn't see any controversial issues they needed outside experts for.
That's a huge nod of regulatory confidence. And you have to remember why that confidence matters so much here. We're dealing with a brutally, brutally unforgiving disease.
Right. Let's ground this in that clinical reality for a moment. Because without understanding how severe IPF is, it's hard to appreciate what a breakthrough this really represents. What are the stakes for these patients?
Well, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is defined by this permanent, relentless scarring of the lung tissue. Fibrosis. This scarring makes the lungs stiff, and it just gets progressively harder and harder to breathe.
And idiopathic just means we don't know why.
We don't know the cause, but the prognosis is staggering. The median survival time is often just 2 to 4 years after someone gets diagnosed.
2 to 4 years.
When you look at the 5-year survival rate, it is right there with some of the most aggressive cancers we know, like pancreatic or lung cancer.
That is incredibly sobering. So with that severity in mind, what was the standard of care for the last 10 years that this drug is now going up against?
Before 2025, patients basically had 2 approved anti-fibrotic drugs. You had preferenidone, which you might know as Esbriet.
Esbriet, right.
And nintedanib, or Afif. Now, they were game changers when they arrived, but they only offered moderate benefits.
How so?
They worked by slowing the rate of decline in lung function. They could reduce that decline by roughly half, but they didn't halt the progression. And crucially, they didn't reverse any of the scarring that was already there.
So they were the best options, but not a great solution.
Not a great solution. The market was absolutely desperate for something new that worked differently or, frankly, was just better tolerated.
And that desperation leads us right to Jascayd's novel mechanism. Nerandomilast isn't just another drug in the same class. It's a novel phosphodiesterase 4, or PDE4, inhibitor.
And we have to be specific here. It's a preferential PDE4B inhibitor.
Okay, so what makes that B subtype so important?
This is where the chemistry becomes a real clinical breakthrough. The older pan-PDE4 inhibitors were like a shotgun. They hit all the subtypes A, B, C, and D. The problem is that hits PDE4D really hard. And that's primarily expressed in the gut. That's why those older drugs cause just horrific GI side effects. Severe nausea, urgent diarrhea. The discontinuation rates were sky high.
So they were causing a ton of collateral damage outside the lung?
Precisely. Nerandomilast, this PDE4B preferential inhibitor, also known as BI 115550, is more like a sniper rifle.
Ah, okay.
It specifically targets the B subtype. That's the one that's highly expressed in the lungs and in the key immune cells involved in the whole fibrosis pathway.
So by targeting that, you get the effect where you want it.
Exactly. It elevates intracellular cyclic AMP or CMP levels through this targeted inhibition. And that gives it this dual anti-inflammatory and anti-fibrotic property. So you're disrupting the cycle of injury and scarring more effectively and with much, much better tolerability in the gut.
That elegant mechanism is the promise, but the proof is always in the data. Before we dig into the trials, just a quick reminder for our listeners. Efficacy in these lung trials is measured by forced vital capacity, or FVC. That's the maximum amount of air you can forcefully exhale after taking the deepest possible breath. It's the gold standard for tracking how fast a patient's lung function is being lost.
And the FVC data from the pivotal phase 3 trials is what sealed the deal here. The Fibroneer IPF trial, that one involved 11,177 participants. And the results for the recommended dosage, that's 18 milligrams, twice a day, they were impressive.
Impressive is an understatement. That 18 milligram dose achieved a 37.5% reduction in FVC decline compared to placebo.
A huge number. And even the lower 9 milligram dose still showed a 24.5% reduction.
That dose response is just textbook?
It is, and this wasn't a one-off success. The Fibroneer ILD trial, which was for the broader progressive pulmonary fibrosis group, another 11,176 patients, showed numbers that were just as good, if not a little better.
Right. In that PPF cohort, the 18 milligram group showed a 40.5% reduction in disease progression. To put that in clinical terms, that meant an adjusted mean FVC decline of just under 99 milliliters at 52 weeks compared to placebo.
Now, a 40% reduction sounds great on a slide, but let's translate that. For someone whose life expectancy is measured in just a few years, what does preserving 98 milliliters of lung function actually mean for them day to day?
It means time. It absolutely translates into time. These small amounts of retained function are the difference between, being able to walk across a room by yourself and needing supplemental oxygen to do it.
It's quality of life.
It's quality of life preserved. And there was another hint in the PPF data of an even deeper benefit that the market is watching very closely.
Yes. So the primary endpoint was FVC decline, but there's unpublished data from that PPF cohort suggesting the 18 milligram dose might also significantly reduce the composite endpoint of acute exacerbations or all-cause mortality.
Wow.
It also pointed to fewer respiratory-related hospitalizations versus placebo. Now, if future labeling confirms a reduction in mortality and hospitalizations, Jascayd goes from being just an anti-fibrotic agent to a true life-extending drug, and that differentiates it profoundly from the old standard of care.
Okay, let's pivot to the multi-billion-dollar question for doctors and for investors. Combination therapy.
The big one.
The IPF trial was smart. It was structured to address this. About 78% of the participants were already on either nintedanib or pirfenidone. So did Jascayd work well as an add-on?
It worked incredibly well.
Yeah.
And this is so crucial because doctors are not just going to pull a stable patient off a drug that's working. They want to stack therapies.
Of course.
The combination data was fantastic. When you add 18 milligrams of nerandomilast to nintedanib monotherapy, the combination reduced FVC decline by 38.1%.
Wait, so adding Jascayd gave you almost as much benefit as nintedanib alone, but on top of the nintedanib benefit.
That's the power of the synergy, yes.
That's powerful.
It is. However, the data was a little less strong when it was combined with pirfenidone. Adding the 18 milligram dose there reduced FVC decline by 32.2% compared to pirfenidone alone.
Still good, but not quite as good.
Exactly. It suggests the compatibility isn't perfectly uniform across the two older therapies.
And this brings us to a really critical nuance. The drug interaction, or DDI, that complicates things specifically with pirfenidone.
This is a huge point. The data uncovered a pretty serious interaction between pirfenidone and the lower dose of Jascayd.
The 9 milligram dose.
Right. When you combine that 9 milligram dose with pirfenidone, the efficacy was statistically the same as pirfenidone alone.
Meaning it did nothing.
It did nothing. It strongly suggests that pirfenidone, which is a potent inducer of certain liver enzymes, just chews up nerandomilast. It accelerates its metabolism and essentially negates its benefit at that lower dose.
So if a patient is on pirfenidone, a clinician has to know. The 9 milligram Jascayd dose is probably useless as an add-on. They have to go to the 18 milligram dose to see any added benefit.
That is a critical piece of prescribing information.
Yeah.
And to their credit, Boehringer Ingelheim knows this is complex. They have a post-marketing commitment to the FDA, APMC, to run a formal DDI clinical trial.
To study this exact interaction.
Yes. To assess the effect of pirfenidone on nerandomilast's pharmacokinetics. They have until June 2027 to get that report in. This really confirms that optimizing that combination is a top regulatory priority.
That's good to hear. Okay, before we get to market speculation, let's hit tolerability one last time. The whole point of the PDE4B inhibitor was to avoid those awful GI side effects. So how did it actually do?
Overall, the profile is definitely favorable compared to its predecessors, but it's not side effect free. The most common issue is still diarrhea. It was reported in about 41% of the 18 milligram group.
Oh, okay.
Other things were decreased appetite, depression, and then, not surprisingly, given when the trial was run, COVID-19 and upper respiratory tract infections.
But the key differentiator here is the quality of the side effect, isn't it?
That's the real story.
Yeah.
The biggest advantages are about convenience and quality of life. First, Jascayd requires no liver enzyme monitoring. That is a massive logistical win compared to the other options. And second, clinical feedback suggests the diarrhea you get with Jascayd is less urgent and easier to manage. So while combining it, especially with nintedanib, did increase the incidence of diarrhea, fewer than 5% of patients in total actually stopped the treatment because of it.
And that manageability is everything for a long-term chronic treatment.
It's vital for compliance.
All right, that brings us to our speculative segment. We have to stress, as always, this is not financial advice. We're not advisors. This is purely a theoretical exercise based on the data.
An outrageous but plausible trade idea.
Exactly. So, given the superior data with nintedanib and the DDI mess with pirfenidone, who loses the most market share and what's the trade?
Well, my thesis really centers on the vulnerability of the established drugs now that combination therapy is validated. And I'd specifically target the one that shows the less favorable interaction data. We know the anti-fibrotic market is ready to adopt Jascayd, especially outside the U.S. I mean, China already approved it for PPF.
So where do we place the bet?
I think the combination data will be the primary driver of adoption in the U.S. because so many patients are already on these drugs. Since the nintedanib combo showed a superior 38.1% FVC decline reduction.
Compared to 32.2% with pirfenidone.
Right. Market perception is going to favor the nintedanib combination. Plus, that DDI headache with the 9 milligram dose and pirfenidone, that adds a layer of complexity that a lot of doctors are just going to want to avoid.
So the thesis is that the market leader, nintedanib, is kind of insulated because it works so well with Jascayd. But the competitor, pirfenidone, is directly vulnerable because of this dosing complexity.
Precisely. The trade is simple. You go long on the incumbent market leader that shows the superior compatibility, so the nintedanib franchise, and at the same time you take a short position on the incumbent competitor, the pirfenidone franchise.
You're betting the market will pivot combination scripts away from the complex pirfenidone path and toward that cleaner, more effective nintedanib Jascayd stack.
You're leveraging clinical nuance directly into a market share prediction.
A compelling analysis, tying metabolic pathways straight to the pocketbook. So, to recap the primary value prop of nerandomilast, this drug ends a decade-long drought in lung fibrosis. It offers a new PDE4B pathway with both anti-inflammatory and anti-fibrotic action, and it has proven utility in combination with better tolerability.
It just expands the toolkit in a big way and offers a much-needed option for patients who really struggle with the side effects of what's currently out there.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. Given the strong data across all these different types of progressive pulmonary fibrosis, including the autoimmune-related ones, and this dual mechanism with better tolerability, how quickly will doctors move Jascayd from being just an add-on to being a viable first-line alternative for patients who can't handle the older therapies?
That's the question.
Is peer resistance going to be the only thing holding it back from dominating new patient starts?
I think the clinical desire for a better tolerated drug might just be strong enough to override those immediate cost objections.
We remind you, as always, to conduct your own due diligence. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the new world of anti-fibrotic therapies.